All right, welcome back, everyone. So I want to get into our last topic of the antiquity period in the Middle East, and it has to do with the Roman world. And specifically, what I want to focus on is Rome and when the Roman world begins to sweep into Judea, the impact it has on the Jewish people. I'm going to talk about three stories here, and it's going to have some very important long-term implications in the region. And so that's what I want to kind of go through. I'll probably break it up into two parts. We'll do kind of a couple stories in the first part and another story in the last part. So probably a couple parts to this lecture. So let's go through our first slide and start with a map. So here we see the Romans, the map of Rome. Now, if you take my History 110 class, I spent a lot of time on Rome. I talk about, how Rome starts as a tiny little dot over here in Italy and then eventually, expands throughout Italy and then eventually controls the Mediterranean Sea. And I cover that in a lot of detail. The Roman world begins 753 BC. It takes them a long time around the year. You don't need to memorize all these dates, but in 509 BC, the Roman world becomes a republic. And for the next several hundred years, Rome begins to expand through the Mediterranean Sea, fighting all sorts of wars, being very successful as a civilization. What we're concerned about for the History of the Middle East class and this topic that I want to talk about is specifically this area of Judea. So that's going to start to happen as we get into the first century BC, as the Romans really begin to shift their power into this area as well. If you know the story of Julius Caesar and Cleopatra and the civil wars that were taking place in Rome during the time, those are some of the things that kind of got Romans into Egypt, and eventually, under the Roman Emperor Augustus, it becomes part of Egypt. That's more for another course. What I want to talk about is what happens when you get this interaction now between the Romans who move into Judea and the Jewish population that's living there. And it's going to lead to a lot of conflicts. So that's kind of the core of what I want you guys to understand in this particular lectures, right? These couple lectures that I'm going to do on, the Roman movement into Judea. So let me go here to our next slide, and I'm going to kind of show you what's going to happen in terms of the root causes. Why does the conflict begin? What are some of the issues that I want to explore? So the Roman Empire itself begins in the year 27 BC. Okay, so again, you don't need to memorize all these dates or anything, but if you want to ever jot them down, the Roman Republic goes from the year 509 BC to the year 27 BC. In 27 BC, Rome stops being a republic, starts being an empire. What's the difference? Well, again, this is more for History 110, but in a republic, you have senators and councils, and they have almost like a checks and balance system, and not one person controls everything. When you get into a Roman Empire, it's not, you have an emperor, and the emperor is the guy. There's, of course, a lot of their political positions and a lot of other things that part of the bureaucracy, even in the empire period. But at the core, there is an emperor, right? And the first Roman emperor is, of course, named Augustus. And once the Roman Empire becomes an empire, that really serves to heighten a lot of tensions, I think, between the Jewish community and the Roman world. And at the core of the issue, I think, honestly, is monotheism. Now, there's other issues as well in terms of land disputes and other things, but when you look at the concept of monotheism goes pretty much against the Roman teachings, right? Romans were a polytheistic society at this point. Eventually, Rome, if you know much more about Roman history, will become a Christianized society. That happens a bit later. But at this time, they have an emperor, and the emperor is the guy. In the monotheistic thinking of the Jewish people, and then Christianity is about to emerge as well, because this is going to be an issue with the Christian population as well. Of course, if you know anything about the European history and the Rome and the Christians, there was a lot of conflict there. And the reason is this: when you think of Judaism and then Christianity, in those monotheistic faiths, your top authority, your top entity that you focus on and you follow is God. Therefore, by definition, your top authority can't be the emperor. And for the Romans, they saw that very often as a type of slap in the face, right? As you're not acknowledging the emperor and you're not following our gods. And so these issues created quite a bit of conflict between the Romans and the Jews, and later on the Romans and the Christians. And so I want to talk about three specific conflicts that happened between the Romans and the Jews, specifically in the region of Judea, in that area. And the first one is going to be a story about Vespasian and Titus. The next one is a somewhat famous story. A lot of people know about a story about Masada. That's a really cool place to visit. And the third thing I'm going to talk about is a story about Hadrian. So those are kind of the core of what I want you to know. So those are the objectives, to understand these three conflicts and understand, the impact. One of the things I like to teach students in my Middle East class is what effects do other civilizations have on the Middle East? And we're going to see this several times in the semester, but obviously we see it now with the Romans going to have a big impact on the Middle East and Judea. So kind of think about that as well, the impacts the Roman civilization has on the Jewish people. All right, so that's what I want to go on to in our next slide and talk about Vespasian and Titus and what happens there. All right, so let's go on here and talk about this first conflict I want you to know. So there's three of them. And the first one has to do with this Roman emperor named Vespasian and his son Titus, who will also become Roman emperor. And it takes place around the year 70 AD. Actually, very specifically 70 AD in what is, I think, a term I gave you before, Tisha B'Av. And what is going on here? Well, by now, the Romans have been in Judea for a while. Again, in the eyes of the Romans, the Jewish people are committing treason towards the Roman leadership. They're not falling in line. And so eventually what happens is Vespasian, which is a very powerful emperor, he was actually the one who built the Colosseum. He actually died before it was done, but he initiated the building of the Colosseum. And then his son moved into Judea. And it was his son who primarily did this effort of moving into Judea. And on Tisha B'Av, 70 AD, he is the one responsible for destroying the second temple. So if you remember when we did the other previous lectures on the Jewish people, I talked about the Solomon's temple, and I talked about how Solomon's temple was built, and then after the period of time the Babylonians came in, they destroyed it, and then the Persians came in and they were able to rebuild it, and then you get the second temple destroyed to Tisha B'Av, and this is a day of mourning in Jewish community all the way until today. And one of the things Titus does is, if you ever go to Rome, and I've been to Rome, I've been to Italy, you go there and, he destroyed, the temple, but he also looted the place. And he took all these spoils from his loot and he brought him back to Rome. And if you look at this image, this is what is called the Arch of Titus. The Arch of Titus you see here is a monument inside of Rome, and it's actually the entrance into the Forum. If you go to Italy, the very famous Forum, and if you look closely inside, I don't know how well you could see this, but here you see, this looks like a menorah, and it's part of the images if you look closely here, and what it's showing you is all the stuff that the Romans took from Judea when Titus sacked the city and destroyed the temple. And so actually there's a tradition today that when Jewish people go to Judea, to go to Italy, and they go to Rome and they go to the Forum, Jewish people don't walk under the Arch of Titus because it's seen as such a negative thing. They walk around it. It's just a little side note. You think about monuments, and this is something I talk about a lot. I actually have a little separate lecture. I do this about how so many of our monuments today we destroy and we move and we change because too many people oftentimes think, well, they're not appropriate. And I have a lecture on that on the side if anybody wants to go and find that. But the thing is, you don't destroy history. That's always my thing. You never destroy history. You teach history. And so I would never advocate, hey, let's destroy the Arch of Titus because it symbolizes such a terrible thing to the Jewish people. But I definitely think you need to teach the history of the Arch of Titus and talk about what it meant and what it represents. And so that was the first conflict that really I wanted you guys to know in this story that really created a lot of tension here and made the Jewish people, of course, very unhappy. All right, so that's the story of the Arch of Titus, and again, that's 70 AD. Now what? Well, it doesn't get any better for the Jewish people when the Romans are there. The Jewish people continue to fight the Romans, which lead us to probably the most dramatic story of these three conflicts, the story of Masada. So let me talk about the story of Masada, another place I've been to, really cool place to visit. And so let me show you images and talk about that. All right, so the story of Masada, this is just a crazy story. So this takes place 73 AD, a few years after the story of the destruction of the Second Temple. Masada was a Roman fortress that the Jewish people captured. It's in the middle of nowhere. It's actually very close to what's called the Dead Sea. I'm going to show you some pictures of that in as well, just as an aside in a minute. And it's up way up high. I'll show you another image here as well. It's actually Masada in the Dead Sea. The Dead Sea is actually the lowest point on the Earth's surface, but it's still, hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of feet up. I think it's something like, I don't want to know exactly, I think like 1,400 feet up to get to the top. And a man named Eliezer ben Yael, you definitely want to know his name, he was the Jewish leader who took control of Masada from the Romans. And he had a group of followers known as the Zealots. And, if you think about today, one of the words we use in our English language is a zealot. And what is a zealot today? We think of a zealot today as somebody being very passionate for a cause, someone who's like will give anything for their cause. And why does it mean that? Well, it means that because when Eliezer ben Yair had his zealots, they were very determined to maintain control of Masada. We have a historian named Josephus who tells us the story of what happened. And so the story of what happens in Masada, let me show you another image here as I tell the story, so make sure you have these words down. So here you see another image of Masada, kind of give you a sense of the geography of it. And let me show you one more actually. In this next one, I'll kind of really tell you the whole story because I think it's a really dramatic image. All right, so this is a really cool photo I was able to pull off the internet. And it's just this image of Masada, of course, and down here below actually is the Dead Sea. And so here you have 960 followers of Eliezer ben Yael. That's it, 960, not that many. And the Romans decide to send 15,000 men to capture Masada. There's a conflict. The Romans, surround the area and they start to make their way up. It's not easy to climb up this thing. You can climb up there today, by the way. I've actually done this climb up there. It's grueling because it's also, I did in the summer, I think it was like 110 degrees and it was just ridiculously hot. There's a cable car if you want to take a cable car up. But you go up there and the Romans had to do this climb up, which was difficult, but they had obviously a number advantage. The Jewish people would fight against them. They would throw everything they can. They had these little cannonballs that they would throw down at them, made out of stone. If you ever go to the Reagan Library, actually, one time I happened to be at the Reagan Library, and of all things, I saw a gift that was given to the Reagan Library, which was this artifact that they found around Masada of the Jewish stone I guess cannonballs, I guess the best way to describe them, of course they weren't cannons, that they would chuck down and throw at the Romans. And so anyways, the Romans start to make their way up. And as the way they make their way up, they're clearly going to get up there. And the question is, what do the Jewish people do? And we have a source, a speech by Eliezer ben Yael. Listen carefully. It's not too long, but I want you to listen carefully because this tells you the climax of what happens as this conflict ensues. So listen what happens here. He says, since we long ago resolved never to be servants to the Romans, nor to any other than God himself, who alone is the true and just Lord of mankind, the time has now come that obliges us to make that resolution true in practice. We were the very first that revolted against Rome, and we are the last that fight against them. And I cannot but esteem it as a favor that God has granted us, that it is still our power to die bravely in a state of freedom. Let our wives die before they are abused, and our children before they have tasted slavery. And after we have slain them, let us bestow that glorious benefit upon one another mutually. All right, so I don't know if you caught that, but what happens is the Zealots commit mass suicide. They know the Romans are going to come up there. They know they're going to capture them. They know they're going to enslave them and do horrible things to them. And so they kill themselves. There were apparently just a handful of survivors who told the story after. And so actually a few years ago, I was watching a documentary on this, and they questioned this a bit, and they go, well, there's no bones found. And that is true. There weren't any bones found. So people, because, when you study history, you have to use sources, archaeology, and everything is not 100%. But then at the same documentary, they also pointed out that at times the Romans cremated the people they defeated and captured. And so maybe that's why there weren't any bodies there. So this is the accounts we have. Regardless, we know that the Jewish people fall, and this is also, you understand now why the term zealot means what it does. These guys were willing to die to that point for Eleazar ben Yael and to fight against the Romans, who were again one of these other civilizations trying to come into Judea. So that's the story of Masada. Pretty dramatic, definitely those are the key points I want you to know about it. So know the name, know about Josephus, know about the numbers and so forth and how it all ended. Okay? So that's the key stuff I want you to know about that. Just as a quick little side story, if you ever go there, Israel's an amazing place to go. So many histories, so many different civilizations have been there since the Jewish people. There's right next to it is the Dead Sea. So this isn't for the class, but it's just cool. This is the Dead Sea that I've been to. A picture. These are pictures I happen to take, and you can see here it's 416 meters. That's meters below the Earth's surface. So lowest point on the Earth, right? Below ocean level, I should say. So lowest ocean level. And what you're looking at over here, this is the ground as you walk to it, and this is salt. This is salt coming out of the ground. The whole thing is salt, and so you literally go into the Dead Sea and just walk in there, and your whole body just floats up. It's such a surreal experience. You can actually put your hand into it, and if you pull out from the salt bottom, you can sometimes find perfect cubes of salt, literally a perfect cube. It's the weirdest thing. So if you ever get a chance to go there, people say, when you go to places, where do we go? And I always say, if you go to Israel, people always say Tel Aviv, it's the big city, Jerusalem, but there's all these things you could do outside those big cities. So definitely, I think the Dead Sea is one of the coolest things you could see and do. All right, so that's the Dead Sea. That's something I want you to just kind of show you as well. So we talked about the story of Masada. We talked about the story of Vespasian and Titus. But the third story has the greatest and most significant impact on the Jewish people. And that third story is what I think I'll pick up on our next lecture here. All right? So make sure you know those first two stories, and then the third story about Hadrian, we'll pick up on the next one. If anything is unclear, just let me know. Have a great day. Thank you.